Hello and welcome back to Understanding and Beating Inflation, my little tutorial about the inflation crisis that we're going through. Today we're going to talk about a very important topic, which is your personal beat inflation strategy. Why do you need to do something? Usually I work with big companies, but when I talk to regular people, especially at the beginning of the inflation crisis, when inflation rates just shot up, people told me, well, don't worry, Wolfgang, it's not going to be that bad. It's prices go up, but also we will make more money. No, let me tell you, I studied for my book, The Return of High Inflation, which I published already in 2016. I studied many countries. It's going to get worse and you need to prepare for it. And here's conceptually what's going to happen and what is going to hit you. We have two lines here. The green line is your salary. That's the money you make every month. And please keep in mind, this is your best inflation hedge. Keeping your job and having a good performance that you can demand salary increases because you need them. Unfortunately, there might not be enough because your cost of living will go up much more than your salary. For most people, unfortunately, that's the case. And I'm developing a program how you can address that and how you bring the green line above the red line. But for now, keep in mind, in the beginning, it doesn't look like a big deal. Yes, prices go up a little bit, but the problem, the inflation gap, gets bigger and bigger. And I have seen it in Venezuela recently when I talked to people there. I have studied cases in Germany, hyperinflation. It doesn't matter whether you have a hyperinflation like in Germany or in the US back in the 70s, it's painful and the pain gets bigger over time if you don't do anything about it. Now, one thing is important to understand, and that's a positive message. If you understand inflation, it pays off. Investing time in understanding how inflation works. You can, for example, watch all the videos that I put up for free. If you understand it, you might do as well as Warren Buffett. Well, Warren Buffett was exceptional. Here's a chart from the 1970s, my favorite chart that I used in workshops with clients. Berkshire Hathaway share price. Remember, inflation in the 1970s was from 1973 to 1982. And the share price of Berkshire Hathaway went up almost 900%. If you were an investor, congratulations, because you beat inflation benchmark by a big margin. But most of you are actually invested in the S&P 500. And let's look how they performed. S&P 500, including dividends, didn't even make it to the inflation benchmark in the period of 1973 to 1982. In other words, you had 10 years of underperformance in comparison to inflation benchmark. And keep in mind, this is the official CPI. Your personal inflation benchmark might be much higher. You might have a lot of tuition for your kids in private schools or health insurance that's exceptionally expensive, for example, for people who are owning small businesses. So accumulated inflation during that time was 130%, and the S&P 500, the top managers of these companies, did not manage to beat the inflation benchmark because they were not prepared. And the good message is, forget about the 900%. That was exceptional. That was best practice. But Warren Buffett, the message is, he understood how inflation works. And with my videos, I'm trying to explain to you how inflation works so you can do something. The inflation gap that I showed you before is not a given. You can change it if you understand it. Now, one message before we go to the strategic part is a warning. inflation comes with higher unemployment rates. Unfortunately, that is almost a given. You see, in the 1970s and 1960s, we had a first inflation rise here, and you see with a time lag of 1 year roughly, the blue line is unemployment rate, the red line is CPI, is consumer price index, inflation. So you see it in the second spike, a year kind of like delay, but we had unemployment rate in the US almost 10%, and in the third spike we had actually unemployment above 10%. You might not think that will happen again, but you cannot exclude this possibility. It's almost always the case that inflation will be fought with by the central bank with drastically higher interest rates. That brings down the growth of the economy, and companies have to react, and that's how they react. The most easiest way to react is to get rid of some people working for you. So unemployment rate, in my view, is very, very likely to go up. So that's a very important point, and that's also one of the key points in our beat inflation framework. We have 5 elements, and here's the mistake most people do. When they ask me, when they hear I wrote a book about inflation, and I give management sessions about this, they always think there is this magic flu shot that protects them against all of the inflation. And I have some other videos where I explain that inflation is a long process, and you always have to readjust your strategy to deal with it. There is no single flu shot, and do not think that you are so good that you find this magic one investment that protects you. Don't think first about investments, think first about your career. That's the most important point. Your job income is the most important income stream because that's the one that you use to pay your bills. If you lose your job, if you're one of the 10% unemployed people, this is a major disaster for inflation. So in my program, which I will introduce at a later stage, I have developed steps that you can not only secure your job, it has to do with raising your bargaining power versus your employer. It also has to do with finding new ways to pick up qualifications and so on. But what we want to do is, A, we want to secure your job, and B, we want you to get a salary rise that helps you to close this inflation gap. That's always what you have to keep in mind. Close the inflation gap. The second point is your family life cycle and budgeting. Budgeting becomes important because you most likely, your salary increases will not match inflation. So you have to also try to find ways to bring your costs down. And that's what you do in budgeting. You also have to look forward. Are your kids going to college in 2 or 3 years? It's very likely that we still have an inflation problem by then. And even if we don't think that after inflation brings up tuition, that it will come down again. That usually does not happen. Okay? Then you also have to do a personal risk analysis. You have to understand your personal risk situation. And the most important thing that you have to do there, and I will introduce that at a later stage, is doing a vulnerability analysis. Where can you get hit and what can you do, right? Then you have to do your macro environment analysis. In some cases, unfortunately, you need to think about mobility. The city where you are, the industries might not do well, so you might need to find another macro environment. Maybe it was a city that was heavily in tourism and entertainment, and discretionary spending goes down and the jobs are not there. You have to go to a different city, a different state. Unfortunately, sometimes you're even forced to go to a different country. Ask the people from Venezuela. Many of the people from Venezuela found only one way to escape the painful hardship of inflation by going to other countries. But this is something you have to prepare. And that was, by the way, also the same when I studied German hyperinflation. A lot of Germans back then went from Germany to other countries. And they did typically well because they were well-educated craftsmen, technicians, engineers. These people were in high demand, so they could do it. But this is another piece that you have to address in your beat inflation strategy. And then you come to the topic that everybody thinks about first. What should I invest in, right? Keep in mind, and I showed you the chart before, the S&P 500, and that's an investment many people have in terms of an index fund or something similar, it did not beat inflation. Yes, it went up in nominal terms, but it didn't beat inflation. That's a warning. So you have to work with a professional, qualified financial advisor to find the best way for you. That's something that you have to do very specific for your situation when it comes to the wealth management strategy, to your situation, to your family, reflecting your life cycle, and try to get qualified support there. So these are the 5 points that we have to basically cover in a beat inflation strategy. I'm in the process of developing a whole class on this topic, and I have developed a framework. Give me a few weeks and I will release it, and that will explain exactly how you can do and beat inflation strategy. It will show ideas, it will show structures and frameworks, and that will help you to adjust to your situation. Please always keep in mind, I have viewers around the globe. You might be different in Italy than in Germany or in the US, right? So you have to develop any strategy to your situational context. That's very important. So I hope that was helpful in terms of a personal beat inflation or anti-inflation strategy. These are the 5 topics that you need to cover. And in the future, in the next few weeks, we will learn more about what we can do. You can follow also my publications on Facebook or LinkedIn or on YouTube. You find a lot of information that I give out for free. These are ideas, they're not recommendations. They're just ideas and concepts and tutorials that help you to get to a better understanding of this problem. Thank you very much. If you like it, subscribe, then it's easier for you to keep up to date with my publications. And if you have questions, shoot me a comment. I will respond to them. It might take me a couple days, but I will respond to comments you have on my videos. Thank you very much and good luck.